Hi everyone, good to see you again. And today is lecture number 3. And how are you doing? How have you been doing so far? We talked about the counselor's identity at the first lecture number 1. And last time we talked about the history and credential in counseling. And in particular, lecture number 2, we covered the two chapters in a brief way. But today, we will talk about some counseling theories, and I believe it's pretty important. So I divided one chapter in 2 different lectures. So we have individual approach to counseling, part 1 today at the lecture number 3. The objectives for lecture number 3 are 3 different things. The first one is discriminate 4 conceptual orientations to counseling. There are many different ways to divide and categorize in many different counseling theories, and the authors use 4 major categorization: psychodynamic, existential and humanistic, behavioral and cognitive. So we want to know the major differences among them. The second one, today we talked about the first 2 approach, psychodynamic and existential and humanistic. So we want to know what would be the key concept and therapeutic process of each the theories. We will talk about the major the theorists in psychodynamic, the Freud, and also Carl Rogers in existential and humanistic, and some other counseling theories in these areas. So we also talked about some other approaches as well. So the first one, we want to know the major differences of 4 conceptual orientation. The first one is psychodynamics. Psychodynamics, I put down 4 different major figures in this field. The first one is Freud. It's called psychoanalysis. As we reviewed in lecture number 2, he was the first person in counseling psychology and psychotherapy. So he really focused on the past experience, and he tried to interpret. He tried to help the client by reconstructing the client's personality. And however, after that, we see 2 other figures in Jung and Adler. They were working together with Freud, but they had a different points of view. So we call them as neo-Freudian. So they have different perspective. They are less deterministic, which means Freud believed our past experience is critical throughout the whole span of life. So it's called determinism, because we cannot change our past. However, Jung and Adler had a different thought. They were less deterministic. They believed we could change our personality by different way. And also the last person is Mahler, is pretty popular recently, is object relations. But anyway, psychodynamic, they stress the past experience, and they also stress personality. Even though there are some different levels, but it is related some deterministic view of the person anyway. And today, we also talk about the existential humanistic category. The Carl Rogers is a major figure in this field. He had a very different view of the person. He believed that a client has a capability to overcome the problem. He believed the client's power and resource and strengths. So it's more humanistic view. And we also know the Fritz Perls, it's called Gestalt, and also some existential approach of Frankl and Rollo May, they are also could be in this category, existential humanistic. Compared to the psychodynamic, this existential humanistic approach focus on client subjective experience. It's called the phenomenological perspective. And also it focuses on here and now compared to psychodynamic because it focuses on past experience. The next one is also very different behavioral approach. They also focus on here and now, but they only focus on specific behavior. We know the Skinner is operant conditioning. We talk about more in lecture number 4. And Bandra believed that clients' own observation and vicarious experience of looking someone else. And Lazarus and multimodal approach and Glasser's reality approach, they could be in the behavior approach because these are all the theories that focus on behavioral change by counseling. The last one is cognitive approach. Compared to the behavioral theories, cognitive theorists believed we can help clients by helping them change their thought, their belief system. So Albert Ellis's rational emotive behavioral therapy is one of the cognitive approach, and Beck's cognitive therapy is another cognitive approach as well. So today we want to know in brief way some major characteristics of 4 different orientations in counseling, and we will talk more these 2 orientations today. Okay, I put down a Freud picture here. As we know, he was the first person who thought about our mind. And he was the first person who developed the idea of unconsciousness. And let's think about his theory's concept. The first one is a view of human nature is deterministic. He believed that our first 6 years of life is critical for our life. And it's a little bit scary because we cannot change our past, in particular first 6 years of life. That's why he believed the parenting is very important in our life. The relationship with the parents is critical as well. And also he supposed that the structure of personality in 3 different levels. Here is the picture that illustrates the relationship between ego and superego. If we look at this one, it's a kind of an iceberg floating over the ocean, and this part, let's see here, the most portion of personality consists of id. Id is our instinct and basic instinct, and is followed by the pleasure principle. So he believed we have 2 different characteristics. Is a sexualized energy, is a kind of drive. It's called libido. The second one is aggression, is another type of id. It's sex to destructive energy. So he believed that we have a basic instinct, it's called id, is a drive to live. And he believed if a baby is born, a baby is a kind of mess of id. It's very filled with the whole id, so the baby tried to cry to get something, and based on the pleasure principle. However, even though we have a sexualized energy and aggression, it is controlled by our ego. Ego is here. Ego is controlled by the reality principle, because we are living in the reality. We try to kind of repress the id. So this is conscious level, but the id is under conscious level, is unconscious level. There's another component in personality, it's called the superego. It's about some morality, it's about some perfectionism, it's about some principles that we have to follow. So the basic instincts is id in the bottom, it's a big portion, and our ego try to control it in our real life, and also we try to follow a higher level of morality, it's the superego. And this is pretty dynamic structure. That's why it's called the psychodynamic and approach. And he believed that like id and superego and part of the egos are under conscious. So we don't know if they are there, but he believed unconsciousness is the major component of our personality. And how can we know if there is an unconsciousness? And he suggested several things. The first one is a dream. He believed dreams is the manifestation of our unconsciousness. So that's why one of his techniques to analyze our dream. The second one is a free association. Free association is the just random association from our mind. For example, let's think about the counseling. What do you have in your mind when I ask you about the counseling? Well, counseling is psychology. Psychology is Freud. Freud is unconsciousness. It's about id. So it's a free association. It's a kind of chain of our thought. And he believed the kind of free associated object is related, and that is based on our unconsciousness. So that's why free association is another technique that he used in order to identify our unconsciousness. And also he suggested ego defense mechanism. If you look at ego defense mechanism on page 90 in our textbook, it introduced several mechanisms. For example, if we have very negative experience of the past, for example, if we have an experience of being abused by someone else when we were young, well, we don't want to recall that experience because it hurts our feeling. And he believed our ego repressed that experience to protect personality. That's why it's called ego defense mechanism. And also, if you have very low grade in your any course, and you may think about, well, I could do better, but I couldn't, but I didn't really make effort for that class. You could say some rationalization. You try to make some excuse because you want to protect. You want to defend yourself by saying that way, by making some excuse. It's called rationalization. That's one of the ego defense mechanism. So when we have some experience that hurt our feeling, we try to protect ourselves by using some defense mechanism. So these are the key concepts of psychoanalytic approach. So his view is pretty deterministic. So really stress on the early life experience and structure of personality like this way, and also unconsciousness and ego defense mechanism are major the theories. Therapeutic process. If you look at this picture, this is the typical the pictures that show some psychoanalysis. So the patient is here, and psychotherapist or psychoanalyst is here, and it looks like the person asked the patient to say something like free association or dream statement. So the therapeutic goal is to reconstruct personality. It's a little bit hard to understand. Let me give some example. I had one client when I was working at school as a counselor. He was a very good student, showed very good academic achievement, and a good student, like smart student. And he was a leader, like 반장 in class. So he looked perfect student. But he wanted to see me because he showed very high anxiety. Here. That was his major symptom. He was very nervous when he missed someone else. Even though he's doing well, he has very high test anxiety. He was very always anxious and nervous in interacting with someone else, even when he talked with me. And when I talked with him, I identified his father was very strict. When he recalled his father, even he cried. And I asked him to recall his past experience when he was young, even kindergarten and first grade in elementary school. And he kept saying many different episodes in which his father was so strict and very rigorous. And I realized he was also looking at me from that perspective, because his anxiety was based on his father. So he recognized a man, an adult man, is the person who is very rigorous and strict and always try to judge me and high expectations. So I have to show the better performance to the father. And I was here, the counselor. And he was a kind of, he had an experience of father, kind of negative experience, and he was projecting his past experience on me. Which means when I worked with him, I recognized he looked at me, but I felt the same way, oh, he is looking at me as a kind of father. So he was very nervous when he met me, because I may be a judgmental, I may be strict and types of things. So he had a negative experience and he generalized his past experience from someone else, not only counselor. I believe his anxiety related with his teacher and some other adult, even his peer. So he believed that that type of anxiety is related to all other person. And that was originated from his past experience with his father. And so the therapeutic goal of this particular client is to reconstruct the personality. You know, he was one of the person, but not all the people around you are the same as father. You don't have to think about that way. You don't have to project that past experience to someone else. So that is, so we want to try to change his kind of pattern of thought by touching and by helping the client to have different insight. Oh, well, that may be true. He was very strict and rigorous, but not all people like that. So that is more personality reconstruction related the episode. So in this case, the therapist's function and role is the interpreter. So interpretation is from the counselor based on his experience and knowledge. So the techniques that could be used in this theory is interpretation by counselor. I mentioned that the free association is one of the things, and dream analysis, and also analysis of resistance and transference. Well, resistance and transference in the cases that I introduced, my client's anxiety to me, that was his projection of his past experience of father to me. That is called the transference. Okay, transference is the client's projection of his past experience to the counselor, and that could be interpreted as resistance because the client didn't want to change his life pattern because that was his personality. So psychoanalytic approach, it focuses on some reconstruction of personality by providing different techniques. So these are the Freud approach, but some other psychodynamic perspectives, some Jung and Adlerian had a different perspective. Jung, it's called analytical psychology. He was much less deterministic, and also he believed two different levels of unconsciousness, not only personal consciousness, but also collective unconsciousness. So, for example, collective unconsciousness is more group-wise, the unconsciousness. For example, in the history, female and male have a different orientation. That could be the identification of collective unconsciousness. And also each people, each different nationality has different kind of orientation as well. That could be related as collective unconsciousness as a whole, the group orientation. Adlerian therapy, it also stresses social support rather than the kind of sexual or aggressive instinct like Freud. So he believed social interaction with others is important in changing our personality. And also he believed placement in family is critical. For example, like a first child or a second child or a last child, they have very different dynamic in their family system. So he believed first child has a certain type of behavioral characteristic, and second child is in the middle, and also last child has different characteristic. So he believed the placement in family, in particular sibling relationships, he believes it's important. And finally, Mahler's object relation theory is pretty getting popularity right now. It's called the 대상 관계 이론 in Korean. She believed our relationship when we were young, like even infant, when early childhood, she believed how do we separate from major caregiver? Because when we were young, the major caregiver is the person that we interact with each other. From that relationship, we grow and we develop them ourselves. So she believed and she focused on our initial relationship with the first and major caregiver. And if you look at our textbook on page 94, she suggested many different stages of our development in terms of relationship with our major caregiver. But anyway, including Freud, and these are three different theorists, their perspective focus on our past experience and try to help the client by changing their personality. These are the common characteristics. However, we after that we have very different approach. It's called existential and humanistic approach. And Carl Rogers here is the major figure in this field. He had very different point of view of person. He believed a person is trustworthy and resourceful and self-directive. So he believed we are capable of resolving our own problem. If we provide three core conditions, these three core conditions, and then client could be recovered by themselves. The first one is a genuineness. Do you remember genuineness? It was one of the first, one of the characteristics of a good counselor. I explained the concept of congruence. So if a counselor shows authentic attitude to the client, and then the client would feel, oh, the counselor is a pretty reliable person. And if client see my counselor is looking at me without condition, so we talked about unconditional positive regard. If we see a client without any condition, if we want to look at the client's inner characteristics, if we accept without any preconception and any judgment, and if we are able to show that attitude to the client, and client will be empowered to get over their problem. Empathy, we talked about the two components, cognitive and emotional empathy as a counselor's characteristic. So Carl Rogers believed if we show three core conditions to the client, that will be sufficient to help the client to get over their problem. So it's called the three core condition. It's necessary and also sufficient condition from his perspective. So the counseling's goal is to client empowerment because we believe client is capable of getting over their problem. And counselor's function is to create the therapeutic climate by demonstrating these three core conditions. And so that was Carl Rogers' person-centered approach or the client-centered approach. And the author put other two theories in this category. The first one is Gestalt. This theory was supposed by the Fritz Perls. He believed if we are able to help the client to experience here and now of the passive problem, that will help the client to get over. So here and now is the major concept in this theory. And also we try to work on unfinished business. Unfinished business is a kind of our emotional reactions to the past. If we have some negative relationship with our friend, if we still have some negative feelings, that could be unfinished business. And some other many techniques are suggested on page 99 through 100. Let me give some example. One of the techniques, it's called empty chair. Empty chair is one of the major techniques in Gestalt. So, for example, if we have a client who wants to have a better relationship with father, we put one empty chair. And we ask the client to imagine your father is sitting here. Okay? So, and if a client has some unfinished business, some negative emotions to the father, and we try to help the client to express his feelings to the father's and ask him to imagine your father is just sitting here, and the counselor helped the client to express and speak out and the whole feeling. And so try to help the client to experience his feelings here and now. Ask him to believe he's right here. So kind of simulate and the past experience to the here and counseling setting. So if a client express by imagining like, father is here and expressing unfinished business, and that he could feel better, and by this activity the client might have some different insight and different thought. So that will be kind of effect of the counseling based on this Gestalt therapy, one of the techniques here. The second one, existential therapy, is not based on techniques. It's more orientation. And Rollo May and Viktor Frankl are the figures in this field. And if you look at this 6 underlying tenet, basic assumption, it will help you to understand what the existential therapy is opposed. For example, capacity for self-awareness. They believe the client has a capable for being able to self-aware, and also freedom and responsibility. So they stress, client has freedom to choose any behavior, but they have to be responsible for their behavior. Striving for identity and relationship, and also they stress the meaning of our life. Anxiety as conditioning for life. So they try to regard anxiety as a natural reaction to our life. And also they try to help the client to confront the death. Because when we aware of our death, they believe we could make our life better by recognizing that awareness of death. So anyway, Gestalt and existential and Carl Rogers' person-centered approach stress our personal experience of here and now. And also they believe the client has the capacity to overcome their problem. That's why it's called existential and humanistic approach. So today we talked about, we compared 4 major conceptual orientation in counseling: psychodynamic, existential, humanistic, behavioral, and cognitive. And we talked about 2 major theories, a psychodynamic and humanistic approach. Next time we'll talk about behavioral approach and cognitive approach and some other recent trend in counseling. I hope you enjoyed watching this lecture, and see you at the lecture 4.